Hello, I'm Frank Stanishi of Open Forum, Candid, Frank, and Live. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV, channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. Now on Open Forum, our guest today is Peter Keleghan, who studied Shakespeare in theater schools in England and Canada with a trajectory towards the Stratford Festival. For over 30 years, the steadily working actor has had a long list of classic TV comedies, movies, documentaries. Peter Keleghan has been called the funniest man in television, winning the 2009 ACTRA Award of Excellence. And, of course, it's filmed in Canada. There's a good chance our Peter Keleghan will be part of it. And I was inundated with my research. And I do not say that with any kind of sarcasm, only straightforward honesty. You have been a very, very busy man.
Mercifully, yeah. I have to say it's been terrific. I've had a great ride in this country. I love this country. I think it's the greatest country in the world to live in, and I think it's the greatest country in the world to be progressive in. It does have its downsides. I suppose in the States we have much more of a star system than we do in Canada. Um, and that probably is somewhere drawn from our socialist roots that we're all together in the same boat in this country. So we don't necessarily like to elevate some people above another, and that's great. I love my place in line. The downside of it is that our star system probably sorely lacks, and that up until a few years ago, some of our broadcasters said, it doesn't serve them well to have anybody promoted in any television situation or any film situation, because as soon as we create a star system, we create monsters, and we create a, a liability for them financially, which should work the other way too. That when you have stars in a country, that they should be money making entities, or they should be able to bring their own you know um, lot of fans along with them in whatever project they wanted to do. And gosh, I remember my wife Leah Pinson and I, when we finished Made in Canada, some of the comments we got with some of the television shows that we tried to pitch for ourselves afterwards was that, well, we don't know, we kind of have that dynamic between you and Leah already. We don't know if we need that again. And I suppose if you draw a parallel to, I don't know, um, some chemistry that worked well in the States, like moonlighting or something, that if
Yep.
that if or X Files, with those Duchovny and Gillian Anderson, that if there's something that works, maybe you should maybe try to do something else with it. But it was kind of the opposite in this country. So yeah, I lived in the States for a few years, about 5 years, and I did pilots down there until probably 6 or 7 years ago. Um, I loved working there, but I hated living there. So I had two children when I was down there, and there was ending up with metal detectors and all sorts of, oh gosh, elementary schools with metal detectors and earthquakes and riots and floods. We just decided to move back.
Well, it's a different
That was a
lifestyle
long
there.
answer to a simple question. I apologize.
That's no, that's okay. We're here to listen to you. I mean, they get to hear me all the time. So if the less I say, the more you say, the better we're off. When you talk about the U.S., there's a there's a difference. It's not just sets that are different. There's basically the way the thinking process goes. Um, you know, Star structure. You touched on it, but it's not just that. It's also the way programming is created.
Yeah, I think especially recently in this country, BIPOC is very much featured in who and what we are and what we see on our screens these days, and rightly so. They've been underrepresented for the longest time. So they're getting a chance to come forward. So, you know, we're actually showcasing some of our more marginalized communities in this country, and I think that's wonderful. Um, and especially also with women in this industry, and directors and writers and actors, et cetera, et cetera. And then, you know, we see some of that in the United States as well, and also rightfully so. But I think the inclination and with any movement of this kind is that the pendulum is going to swing very far in that direction and then come back somewhere in the middle, so that, you know, there are people like me out there, 60 something white guys, that do want entertainment, do want to see themselves represented on TV screens, but we need to step up and to pay attention to these people at this point. Obviously, they're big parts of our community. Uh, in the United States, I think it's for my money, it's much more. I've always called it fast food culture. It's cheap, it's addictive, but it's lowest common denominator. So it will appeal to a broad spectrum of people, but generally, it's not going to elevate you into celebrating diversity or anything like that. It's just going to appeal to Kardashian fans or whatever that I don't necessarily appreciate, and that's why I like what we do in this country better, because stuff tends to be a little bit smarter here, and they do, you know, they do love Canadian actors down in the States, you know, and it's very obvious with everybody that we've had down there, from Mike Myers, John Candy, Jim Carrey, Catherine O'Hara, all of us that have had some sort of profile down there. We're much more diverse. We tend to be stronger performers, you know, rather than just personas that we can actually um, encompass a character rather than just portray themselves in a almost a reality type situation. You know, reality shows are a big part of mainstream television now and culture,
Yeah, I
which
think
personally I don't quite get. But
I think part of it also is that Canadians, and even, you know, there's a lot of English actors that are getting a lot of popularity, as well as Australians in the past. It might have to do with the fact that I'll include myself in that group, being Canadian, that we see America like they don't. And
mm,
I think part of the knowledge that an actor needs or a comedian needs is a better understanding of the complete United States, an open sort of concept to what's going on there, which affords comedians to be funnier, actors to be more deep, and singers to be more open to the kind of music that is more mass culture driven, as opposed to, you know, what I call polarity driven
yeah,
success.
yeah. Add to that, I think that's very true. But add to that too political correctness. You know, I grew up on stuff that was very politically incorrect, most especially Monty Python or Bugs Bunny. That I really I credit Bugs Bunny with giving me some sort of understanding of comic timing, because it was brilliant. Looks to camera, and oh, Chuck Jones especially in those cartoons. But the idea of political correctness and the cancel culture that goes along with it. You know, how do we legitimately separate people's lives from the art that they create? How did Woody Allen get away with loving a 17-year-old Mariel Hemingway in one of his movies, and it not really showing up on our radar? And JFK being protected from his womanizing, but now it's a completely different situation. It's certainly a learning curve, and I think it's a valuable one, and I think the Me Too movement is on the absolute right track, and carry on down that road fast and furious. But we have to have some kind of um, understanding of policing it properly, so that the baby doesn't get thrown out with the bathwater. And I don't know, I don't know from whence that comes. I have a sneaking suspicion that I think most people will point at social media and their part in Oh, turning something that, like Hillary Clinton being running a pizza plate that's also a pedophile, and all of this kind of stuff that is so easy for, especially foreign interests during election years, to infiltrate and to propagate, and yet it being picked up by social media allows it some kind of credibility, and enough credibility that people actually buy into this stuff.
Well,
So
we're seeing that in real time right now. We've
absolutely,
seen it in
yeah,
real
and so are
time
the
with the
Russian
Ukraine.
people.
We're seeing it in real time where there's talk about, germ warfare, and there's the problem is, and to your point, I guess, is that it's not even strange bedfellows anymore. The enemy of my enemy is not necessarily my friend, but people seem to think that old strategy works. Now it's strictly, it's self purpose is always the thing that's involved, and we see it going into politics. I don't mind talking about politics, but I want to talk about you, the man, and the way you've entertained the world, and we can use that as an example as well, because you're a guy who, as a young man, uh, had a pilot's license at 15 years old. You saw yourself as a pilot. You literally had to reinvent yourself because you felt that you really didn't have chemistry and physics as a strength. Speak to we have to change. We have to make changes in our life. How difficult was it for you to first accept that the fact that that dream may not be a good one for you long term, and how you switched things?
It was probably easier for me to do it than it was for my family to understand it. My father is old Polish stock, first generation Canadian, survivor of World War II, got separated from his parents, made a life in the, got an education in essentially science, engineering, aircraft, TV, technical stuff. And when I came along, I was a complete anomaly that that I could possibly end up making or trying to make a living for myself on the stage or in front of a camera. And in fact, my parents at that point, being very insular, being very sort of head down, nervous, first generation immigrants, had no idea what to do with me. But to their credit, tried to understand where I was going, and that there was no way I was going to become a pilot. I was a pilot, but I was a private pilot, and I wasn't going to get into the airlines because you needed strong chemistry, math, and physics. Tried to make up for failing high school in that, and in summer school, and failed summer school. So it all sort of added up, and really, as a shy kid, which I really was in high school, I started getting into theater. I started being a performer, because, as I said many times, that you could hide behind a character. It wasn't necessarily you that you were portraying. You weren't the vulnerable one that people were looking at. It was some other creation of a writer, and the magic of theater and television that could create somebody that wasn't that you didn't that couldn't jeopardize your sensitivity or your shyness in my case. So that's how I got into it, and it was a huge learning curve, for many reasons. I went to many theater schools that, after 2 years of a college in Montreal at a professional theater program, they said, maybe you should think about doing something else. You're not necessarily made out to be an actor. And so, went from place to place, and I started learning and learning and learning, and eventually found myself in, also more of comedy, I guess, the comedy world of Second City, as opposed to any kind of classical theater, where I was aiming to be, because I thought it was the pinnacle of uh, performance art in this country. But I found, in going to the Stratford Music Festival and the Shaw Festival, that it was a very different situation, and the details of which you could read about in my memoirs someday. That I'm in the middle of writing them now, but there was a lot of dirt there that got me out of it pretty quickly. So I got into Second City, and from Second City I got into Steve Smith, and he was starting a show called the Comedy Mill at the time.
Yep.
where I got to write some of my own stuff. I got to perform in all of it. And as he said, give me enough money to make a TV show, but not enough to care about what I'm doing, which was golden for all of us because, it was not only in the, what was this? This was mid 80s, I suppose. It was, infancy for myself, Mag Ruffman, Linda Cash that rounded out the cast, but we could sink our teeth into writing and performing without having the fear of too much exposure to kill us outright or to damage our reputation with making mistakes on as we went along. So yeah, we made our mistakes, but we also cut our teeth and we learned a hell of a lot. It was by no means an SCTV. There were some shining moments, but we had the greatest time for 3 or 4 years doing that show.
This was in
And with
London,
all
right?
of the genesis, sorry,
This was in London, right?
no, the comedy mo with Steve Smith. Steve Smith was the Red Green.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
So I've skipped ahead now to when I got back from London, England, from theatre school to bypassing Sean Stratford that I described briefly, and now I'm into my first television experience in
I was
Canada, which
referring
was
back
with
to London, Ontario's second city when you were there.
Oak Sherry. Yes, of course.
That's I
Yeah, that
confused you. I
was that was
apologize.
that was a main stage. That was a touring company. Um, the touring company, the national touring company, was a farm team for London Second City, which no longer exists, and London Second City was a farm team for main stage Toronto Second City.
Off
Um,
Broadway-ish.
yeah, but that's London Second City is where I met my best friend Pat McKenna. We've remained very close friends to this day, and we share a lot of sense of humor. I must say,
You more than
we get
cut your
along
teeth
well.
there. There was a
Yeah,
lot of emotional connections you made, a lot of friends you made there that long lasting.
yeah, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work, and how far I can get away with whatever characters I was doing. You know, at the same time, I also learned that I didn't have the Pat McKenna, Colin Mockery improv gene. I'm a better prepared actor than I am an improv actor. That was learned there too, and
And
that's
more
good.
of a
I mean,
straight man. And that's not easy to do because the emotions displayed have to be subtle.
yeah.
There's more of a subtlety
Um,
to it.
I, with any comedy, I've always prided myself in, and again, going back to even Bugs Bunny, it's just him doing stuff with a straight face. It's just you take it seriously, and if you could suspend belief in a character like I did on the newsroom, which was a profoundly stupid anchorman, if I could make the audience believe that I was actually serious about saying something that I did or doing something that I did for a few seconds, and people believed that there was enough earnestness in what I was saying that they could believe me for a few seconds before saying, "What did he just say?" Then I've done my job.
Yeah, you
So
like that pause
I've
before laughter.
I've never been, I've never subscribed to, that sort of, I don't know how to describe it better than overt clownishness that breaks out of the reality of what it could possibly be. Because I think as soon as the reality is broken, you really can't. You're only then as good as the next joke that comes up, as opposed to a scenic progression of the character's dialogue, etc. So you have to believe what's going on, and if it happens to be funny, great.
Yeah,
If that
you
makes sense.
speak very highly of delivery. Delivery is very important.
Yeah, and sometimes very, very difficult to play a straight man because I've been known to be a good bit of a giggler.
I heard that, and I was going to ask you about that in particular because you could end up being the audience because you're the straight man. It's counterintuitive, right? It's more important for you
Yeah,
not
I
to
mean,
laugh.
you find yourself, getting standing outside of the character and listening to what this person is telling you. For instance, A good example would be the newsroom and Ken Finkelman and I. And there's one particular scene where he's admonishing me, Jim Walcott, for me thinking that a woman's decision should be between her for abortion should be between a woman, her doctor, and her dog. And I thought she said dog, and she said, "How would you possibly think that she said dog? It's God, it's not dog." And we couldn't do it. We couldn't do it. An hour and a half later of a camera, spinning back and forth the way you remember that newsroom camera was. We eventually had to give up, and when you look at it now, it's singles on Ken and singles of me, and he's looking at a spot on the wall, and then he goes away, and I look at the spot on the wall. So yeah, it's and that kind of tension is so exciting when you feel that sort of bubbling up of inertia, and if you can get it right, that it's going to be fantastic. To his credit, he wrote it that way.
Let's talk about some of your favorite parts. I mean, I honestly, and I meant it sincerely for the viewers out there, that I could spend 10 minutes right now listing all your credits. Um, as an actor, and the parts that you've played being Canadian, one thing you said you're proud of being Canadian. I know you are. I know that from the research that I've done. And I know also you respect the fact that as a Canadian, you have to work twice as hard for half
For
as
half the
much.
money.
Yeah, and that's a true statement about Canadians, period. We seem to be, as a people, easier to satisfy, which might go towards why Americans like using Canadians because we have low expectations. But to your to your to your way of thinking, how do you decide? Because I don't know that you make a decision on what part you're gonna play, because if I wanna know what's going on television or in Canadian movies, I just have to look at your page and see what movies and TV shows are going on. Do you ever do you how come you have this endless energy to keep churning out whatever character you can do on any show on any given day?
The desire to eat, really, and create. I mean, not thank you for all your, how for saying how long my resume is, and that's probably half of what I've actually done, because the other half is doing an awful lot of things that never end up being aired because they're just sort of proof of concepts and things that young directors and writers and producers tend to want to get some names and faces and good actors so they can say to a network, hey, would you like to do this show about ABC? And and CBC can look at it with some decent people and say yay or nay. So I've done an awful lot of that stuff. But as equating Canada to whatever comes along. I mean, I think whatever comes along now is almost in lockstep with what's happening in the States, because so much of what we do here could be American production shooting up here, or so much of what we do here ends up being big in the States. Murdoch Mysteries being a good example, or Working Moms to a certain extent, and a few other things. So that it's a global, it's much more a global market than it ever has been. And Canadians, you know to validate themselves during my father-in-law's time, Gordon Pinson's time, you had to move to the States and say I made it there. And before him, it was Mordecai Richler having to move to England to say, okay, I can make it in England now, I'm valid here. It's less and less the case now, because we're getting better and better at what we do. um, so the work that comes along here, the quality and the crap, uh, you sometimes can't judge. I've done things that I thought would be never see the light of day that end up being big hits, and vice versa. So I'd like to say that you get better at doing it, and you do to a certain extent. You sort of have, there's a smell test when you first pick up a script. But at the end of the day, you don't want to miss an opportunity of something that you could have misjudged. And but yeah, you get better. You get better at judging. Let's leave it at that, I suppose.
No, I think what you're saying is quite true. I mean, with anything in life, right? No project, when you start it, can you predict where it'll end up? Because in fact, it's fluid, right? So how something begins is never always how it ends. So, and then
Yeah,
sometimes the
very
middle
much
it
so.
gets a little confusing too. So, no, but what
Yeah.
what um what I enjoy about some of the things that you said, and I'd like you to expand on it, is that the importance of a project. The difference between a project and an idea. If I define a project as a business proposition and an idea as a belief in telling a story, when it becomes a project, in other words, it becomes a business proposition, sometimes that hurts, you know, the the art part of the process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And how do you see that?
Well, it's always the case. You're going to come into bean counters every way along the line when you try to pitch something that they're going to say, well, what's the audience, and can we cast a woman in this part or a South Asian in this part, and we're going to diversify so that we have this and that. I tend to think that I've always been a huge proponent of auteur-driven things, and I think it's been proven over and over and over again with Larry David and David Chase and Ken Finkelman and Steve Smith, and that the power starts and stops with that person and that person's creativity. And as soon as you start polluting that with mandates or injections of trying to make it more populist or more diversified, so that it will appeal to a larger audience, or that it will appeal to a sponsor, or can we can we put an Apple computer in it? Excuse me. You're going to run into problems, and the more we go along in this business, and when we look at how over the top entities like Netflix and Amazon are starting to produce more and more product from all over the world, we're going to get some amazing stuff from Mexico and Ireland and England and Canada and everywhere else. It's so much more a global market in that sense, that you're the financial aspect, the business aspect of that thing, they're on that learning curve too, and I think it has uh, benefited that proposition. In other words, I think that it's obvious now that the creative is much more important than the financial, simply because there is so much stuff out there and so much stuff being consumed that the pot is full. So if you're, Joe Blow, Mary Sue from wherever, and you might have an idea for a show and it's kind of funky and weird. Excuse me, a friend of mine, gosh, I can't remember the name of the show. It's called Sort of Fab. I think it's called Sort of, and the guy's name is Fab Filippo, and it started as a little webcast on CBC Gem, and it's now a full-fledged TV series on CBC that's fantastic about trans people. I did a little thing with Jane Eastwood and Jackie Richardson a couple of years ago called Hey Lady, which was a little tiny 5 minute, 10-minute episodes that now apparently is going to go to series. So the stepping stone beyond, you know, Palmolive having a say or Philip Morris having a say in a movie that I just watched with Here's Lucy, or
Yep.
Lucille Ball and Ricky Ricardo. It's not so much the case anymore. I think we're in better shape now that way.
Let's go on a personal level here. You've worked with Leah Pinsett, your
Yep.
your wife. Um, Big news from Grand Rock. Tell us about it.
Well, a few years ago now, but um, big news from Grand Rock was about a fading little local community newspaper in Grand Rock, and the lead actor Ennis Esmer tries to rejuvenate it by creating these fantastical stories he gets found out about. And my father-in-law was in that too. He played the movie editor, the sorry, the newspaper editor, and
Again, Gordon Pinsett, just so people know who
Gordon
we're
Pinsent,
talking about.
yes.
Yeah.
So it was again a low budget movie that they wanted strong performance for. So they got Ennis and they got Gordon, and we all came on board, and we all had the greatest time because, well, as I joked, you're not paying me enough to tell me what to do, so I'm going to do what I want to do, and you know, whether I fail or I soar, it's on me. And I think in that case, I made an awful lot of crew members laugh and fellow actors laugh with that character I played. So
Yes, you
I
did.
think it worked.
Sex After Kids.
Mm.
What comes to mind when I mention those three words?
Jeremy started off as, I believe, an editor, and with aspirations to direct and write, and so he wrote that film. And it was me and Amanda Brugel, and it was various stories about human beings that have had children and trying to rekindle some kind of a sex life after they have had children, and whether it works or not, whether they get cheated on or not, whether they uh, lose their way, fall. All of that stuff was in there. Lovely little film. Um, Again, I think it was a Canadian film with an awful lot of uh, good people in it, good writing, good reviews, but one of those things where Canadian films are really struggling on Canadian screens right now, mainly because um, hmm, a lot of reasons. When you look at a little microcosm like Quebec, they produce amazing films, and their ratings numbers, their culture supports their film and television and theater much more so than the totality of the rest of this country does for anything that we produce. So, we're in an awkward position of being an awful lot like the Americans. And if you can go and see a superhero movie with Robert Pattinson, and rather than go to see a Canadian movie that has much more, much more intelligent, probably much more uh, thought provoking, and has social commentary much more than any kind of American stuff does, you're probably not going to go because you either don't know about it or you don't know people in it. So it's just you put it out, you put it out, you put it out, and to an awful lot of people's credit, they're really trying hard to create a different business model for our film, especially to be seen by Canadians. There's a great organization called Real Canada that does Canadian National Film Day, and they go across the country every April, and they show a free Canadian movie to high schools, to ESL classes, new immigrants, and in a really, I wouldn't say covert, but a very nurturing way, teach people how important and how much we need to respect what we do in this country in film and television because it reflects us. And so every year they provide free films to schools. I and myself and a bunch of other people, Paul Gross and many others have gone on tours and show up at high schools and various theaters and talk about what we've done and who we are, and we really get a lot of traction out of that. So all of that movement is there, all of it is happening. It's going to take time.
And the reason it's important is because it's much easier to import than it is to create.
It is. I mean, the business model is much more profitable for large theaters and especially private networks to buy American stuff. Global TV is a prime example of that. That they, they're very hesitant to produce anything Canadian because they don't make that much money in it anymore, and all public networks are suffering now because of Netflix and all the private streamers. So they're looking for the best business model. So it's this evolving ooze of stuff that we're all trying to make sense of and to move forward in. At the same time, we're not working with being hamstrung by a bunch of bureaucrats like we were in the 60s and 70s that said, it has to be stamped Canada. You need a little icon of a beaver in every frame. It doesn't happen that way anymore. It's just a sensibility and a and an and a, and a, an affection for who and what we are and our subtle differences in this country that just needs to be incorporated, and that happens organically by hiring Canadian actors, writers, and producers to produce this stuff.
We're seeing a lot of, the other one of the shows you're in, Working Moms. The writing in that show has improved drastically in the short time that it's been on the air, 2 years from the first episodes, which I watched. I really liked the show, and the writing's getting more. You were talking about, growth as a parent. In one episode which you're in, the mother finds out her son's gay by accident, and she plays it. The character plays it off much like what we're talking about. More of a straight face, right? And the writing is what I find Canadians can do really well. And I don't think Canadians get it. Canadian writers and actors who write, and people who do stuff like that, direct. We have local people in Toronto that do some great work, are finally being given an opportunity. Isn't it just about exposure and trust?
Yeah, and again, that auteur situation comes into it. Working Moms is very much Catherine Reitman's baby, and the buck starts and stops with her. So if she makes a decision that this is what she wants, not only in the writing, but then in the filming and then the directing, and then finally in the editing, generally speaking, she gets her way. And the more that happens, even though it might not be as good as The Sopranos or
Ah,
Larry David
oh my.
comedy, it has integrity, and that integrity is the nub that's going to spur things on. So the more network executives realize that and nurture that, the better off we're going to be. And
Eh,
I think you're right. I think it did improve, and I think they learned, and we all learned together, and we also found out from what the public was saying, what the audience was saying, and from what critics were saying. This was representing middle class white women with good jobs. It's not really representing everyone else that we want to be representing, which is marginalized people or people of color or gays or all that. And it's morphed. They figured out, along the way how they wanted to do it, and it became a big hit. And same thing with Kim's Convenience and Schitt's Creek and everything else. Schitt's Creek, I think,
absolutely.
being a prime example of things getting much better as it went along. At the beginning, I always thought it was kind of a one joke, this rich family fish out of water story and crazy things that happen in a small town. And then, but it got bigger and bigger and bigger. It found its footing, and won virtually every award in the book.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the benefits of, I don't know, is there a benefit to the pandemic? People binge watch stuff, and that, I think that show primarily, more than any other show, benefited from that. People searching for good programming, and there's a lot of great Canadian programming historically, and thoughtful stuff. I liked a show that you did, but it didn't get traction. I guess maybe because we're too nice in Canada. Afghanada. I found that to be very, very interesting, and I know you have to kind of follow the news, and you gotta try a little harder to understand the subtleties of the humor, and also replace the actual what you're looking at with what it represents, not what it is. It's it's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's a it's a hard sell, but it came
Yeah.
across well. Speak to that experience.
Oh gosh, Frank, that was such a long time ago. I
I
it
realize.
was radio. I'm sorry. I remember liking it. I remember loving the people that I was involved with. But again, it was CBC Radio, which oh, it's morphed into something very different now. That whole radio drama experience that had an ignominious end, I think. Uh, we were celebrating. Oh gosh, I hesitate to give you the details because they're a little foggy in my head. But it was something like 100 years
Understandable.
of CBC radio, and they had a budget of about $500 to put this thing on at the Glenn Gould studio, and it was me and some people from the Frantics and a few other people that had done a lot of radio drama, and we were there to celebrate huge accomplishment by CBC Radio, and I think mainly because so many people have turned off of that medium, except for I guess podcasts now, which are have become huge and in some ways a lot like radio drama. So it may reinvent itself at some point, but it was unfortunate that whole device has gone by the wayside. I think it still has legs, but I think it's gone for the foreseeable future.
Your character in Murdoch Mysteries, Terrence Myers.
Yes, Terrence Myers, Canada's first super spy.
I had a friend of mine
Um,
ask me, who killed Abraham Lincoln? Was the question I should ask you or ask the character.
who killed Abraham Lincoln? I don't know. Gosh.
What would the
Um,
spy have said? I think is what they were trying to get to me.
it's probably like a. It was a Russian operative, probably.
There you go. Your character's wonderful. You know, you've had the opportunity to repeat characters. That character in particular, you you want to talk about Bugs Bunny? I mean, you draw a lot of Bugs Bunny out of that character.
excuse, excuse me for 1 second there. I got to blow my nose. Sorry.
Okay. In case
Nothing to
you
do with
just,
Terrence Myers.
I understand. In case you've just joined us, we're talking to Dr. Oz. And if he can hear me say that, he'll probably come back in here and laugh. But really, I was just telling the folks
Uh,
that we're with Dr. Oz, in
oh,
case,
yeah,
if they've
that
just joined
people call
us.
me Dr. Oz. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
no,
get that a lot, and I
yeah,
get that in the states a lot. I've walked through airports in the states, and people have actually stopped me and said, "Oh, you're a doctor," and I don't get it. My wife doesn't get it. My mother thinks I look like Dr. Oz, but anyway.
so
Terrence Myers was a huge gift, and it was um, uh, I worked a lot with Shaftesbury, Christina Jennings, for many years, and worked with them and for them, and we've created stuff together. I had my own short series with them. We've always had this great relationship, and Christina Jennings, to her credit, is just this just a wonderful stalwart entity of the business and so supportive in so many ways and helping women directors and all sorts of projects that she just takes under her wing and she fights her way through all the bureaucracy to get done. She's a force of nature and to her credit, she had Murdoch Mystery start. I think there was a different Peter Outerbridge, I think, was the original Murdoch, and then it went from MOW to a series, and then Yannick was cast in the series. And then in the very first season, I appear um, as a kind of I think a kind of a foil to Yannick's character because he's very sort of down to earth procedural cop on the streets on the beat in Toronto, and I was sort of a high flying intrigue, um, James Bond kind of character from the Canadian government that was either good or was bad, depending on what day it was, and would lie or would not lie, depending on who you believed, and et cetera, et cetera. So it brought a lot of, uh, I guess, sort of unprovincial Toronto to Toronto, if that makes any sense, in 1900.
Absolutely.
And so, so much fun to do. Yannick and I have been friends for, I want to say, 30 years, 35 years. Um, and gosh, it's on season 15 now, and it still has all of these legs. I mean, it's huge in Japan, it's huge in France, it's doing well worldwide, and such a great Canadian success story. Very, very proud of that. It's
Again, we're talking writing. It's great writing because there isn't much flamboyance that you're accustomed to with U.S. television. There's no car explosions. The
Yeah, and
it,
it's a period piece. I guess it's a kind of
absolutely.
a Sherlock Holmes in the turn of century Toronto, with nice old costumes and horses, and it's a slower pace, and it's kinder, friendlier, and gentler, and you can watch it with the whole family as opposed to looking away on shows like Ozark or whatever. So it's different in that way. It's got that niche um, sensibility to it, and people that love it are absolutely rabid about it. It has a huge following. And last year we did 24 episodes,
Yeah.
which is unheard of in not only Canadian TV but any TV anywhere. Right, and the
Ten's a
states are.
number nowadays. Ten's a number nowadays. 10 to 13.
You're
And
lucky
that's the season,
to get
right?
10. Yeah, yeah.
You know.
With
Let's talk
24.
a little bit about. We'll talk about your character, Ranger Gord. Um, but first, I was kind of like segueing. We're talking family and stuff that you can watch with your family. I remember watching. I pretty much watched the whole series of 18 to Life. For
Yeah.
me, my children were born in the same window that yours were. So, what was it like doing that show? Basically, leaving the show as a father, teenage children, and then going home to teenage children. Because if my math's right, that's about correct, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah. Uh, I again, that character that I played, Ben Bello, was very right wing, very button down kind of guy,
Absolutely.
which is not necessarily who I am, except for maybe the hair. But yeah, my relationship with my kids was very much more liberal than Ben's was with his family. Certainly not as strict, certainly not as rigid, certainly not as conservative as he was. So. Um, I will tell you a funny story about the very first time that my little girl, Shauna, well, little girl, she's 30 now and she's going to be a doctor in a few months. But anyway, we were sitting down and we were watching one of the first shows I did in Toronto, which was Goosebumps, an episode of
Mhm.
Goosebumps. She was very small at the time. She must have been 5, 7 years old, probably five. And we were sitting there, we were watching, and I didn't tell her I was on, and she didn't quite understand what I did for a living. But all of a sudden, I came on TV, and I was the father of these other two kids, and these two kids were being terrorized by lawn gnomes that came alive at night when the moon shone on them. The lawn gnomes became very angry and aggressive, and they started ripping up lawns, and then the kids got blamed for it. And I was very angry at my children for doing this damage, and calling them ridiculous that these lawn gnomes were coming to life, that it was couldn't possibly be true, etc., etc. Anyway, that's the story, and I'm sitting there with my daughter, and she's looking at it, and then she didn't take her eyes off the screen, and very sort of nonplussed with the whole thing, just sort of watching and watching, and the show was over, and I'm sitting there waiting for some sort of reaction, and I'm not getting anything. I looked over and I said, "So, Shauna, like, what did you think?" She said, "Dad, when your little girl said that she saw the lawn gnomes coming to life, why didn't you believe her?" And I thought, how amazing, that she totally, she's totally suspended that this is Dad here, but there was another Dad there that I could possibly be, and that had this other little girl, and that other little girl was being traumatized by lawn gnomes, and it was fantastic. So, uh, what was the original question?
The original question was the effect that, being a parent and then
18
eventually
to life.
becoming a
Yeah.
parent and having it relate to life. What ho do you use that in any way? I understand the character was I totally understand the character. totally different than you are. We discussed, your political angles before the show, so I understand, and I know the show. I watched 18 to Life with my children, by the way, about the same age as yours. And that, you're playing a different character. Do you get anything from being a parent? Is it, and you gave me an answer. You actually gave me an answer. You switched the program, but the idea is there, is that you can play for your children. There are many an actor in the world today who want to be in a Disney movie, not because they want to be in a Disney movie. They want to be in a movie their kids care about and want to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
watch. Right?
Of
And
course.
that's
Yeah,
the
of course.
question. That's the question that I was asking. And you
Yeah.
answered it beautifully. Yeah, you answered it beautifully. The Red Green
Well,
Show.
I did, what time was when, I did a lot of animation, and a lot of the cartoons that I did, my kids absolutely loved Ruby Gloom and Willa's Wildlife and a bunch of other things. So yeah, that Goosebumps and a few other
Yes.
kids shows. I did one other. Oh, it was Cheaper by the Dozen 2 with Steve Martin and a few other people, and I was cast as the guy that rents them out the cottage. Uh, uh, and my kids at the time were really interested in becoming actors, and I thought, okay, there are many other things you can do, and I wasn't going to push them away from it. I wasn't going to influence them, except for the fact that I was doing it, and they liked what they saw as far as the parties and the awards shows and all that kind of stuff, and then the glamour and what they perceived to be a kind of a privileged life. So I decided that on this movie, where they were 8 and 10, maybe a little younger, maybe 7 and 10 or something, somewhere around there, that I would get them little parts as extras on the film. And it was up in I want to say Balls Falls in the Kawarthas, something like that. And it was a day that was about 95 degrees and about 100% humidity. And they were in the sun from about 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. doing egg on the spoon races, etc., etc. And they thought, oh, yes, I thank you, Dad, for getting me this part. And at the end of that day, with their $120 check or whatever it was, I did the right thing. they were totally uh, they were totally out of it at that point, and I thought, perfect,
the,
perfect.
the this the subtlety of that parental act.
Mm.
Ranger Gord. There's not a. I don't think there's a roll of duct tape that doesn't know who Ranger Gord is.
Again, that came from Steve Smith. It came from the original show that we did, which was the Comedy Mill, and there was a sketch with the Akalas, like Boy Scout Akalas, and Ranger Gord was actually Akela Gord, very officious, very lonely forest Cub Scout leader. And when he did the Red Green show, he said, "How about making it Ranger Gord?" And it was a forest ranger that was stuck in a fire tower, extremely lonely, for many, many years. Very officious, um, um, very dedicated, uh, and some really amazing writing. And again, very, very hard to do sometimes, because if you look at Steve Smith when you shouldn't look at Steve Smith, and he has these poppy eyes and he's listening to what you're saying, you're gone. It's impossible to not laugh and work with Steve Smith. Um, it helped a little bit, I suppose, when we came in from the forest where we used to. There was gosh, I think it was Port Carling or something. There was an abandoned fire tower that we used to shoot at every summer, and we eventually had to go into the CBC studios where they built a fire tower, and then there was a live audience. And I'm not a big fan of live audiences, because I find that if you're afraid to make a mistake, if you're just performing, if you're trying to just get it done for 200 people, you're missing out on doing it really well for a few thousand people or 100,000 people on the audience. And so if you mess up a take, you're disappointing an immediate audience, which puts a lot more pressure on you to get it right the next time, and your cast members and the camera people. Anyway, that aside, we had a live audience, which made you make sure you didn't crack up as much as you did. It was it was just as much fun to do the show, but maybe slightly less laughing with each other.
This is fantastic. There were a couple of other things. We might have to hook up with you again that we didn't have a chance to talk about.
Okay.
Lloyd Braun, the Seinfeld episode, the fact that you were in Street Legal and you talked about being an extra. I was an extra in that show. I had a mustache, so they put me as a cop. So we can talk about all those things. There, you were in Cops, Screwballs. There are tons of, as I said, Peter. It's been a pleasure to talk to you here today. I've known you for a long time as a person who's an actor and out there that I watch, and you've done a lot of stuff that I personally enjoyed, and I'm sure there are a lot of people out there as well that can relate to the beauty of the art that you help generate, and I thank you for that and for this today.
Oh, bless you, Frank. Thank you very much, and keep up the great work. I really appreciate it.
I do too. Thank you, sir.
A lot
So
of
for
fun.
Peter Keleghan, I'm Frank Stanishi. Thanks for watching Candid Frank Live's Open Forum, seen live Fridays, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network. For Open Forum, other news, entertainment, and sports programming we offer, please check out spanglishworld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thanks for watching, everybody. Until next week, I'm Candid Frank. See you then.